My name is Ethan Carter, and until recently, I had the kind of job most people would envy. Stable, with benefits. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but it was a steady paycheck. I'd been working at the company for almost a decade, building a reputation, forming relationships, and trusting the system that promised a secure future. I was content. At least, I thought I was. It all started when I got my pension statement. I remember opening it, thinking I'd get a pleasant surprise after so many years of service. Maybe a solid chunk of savings waiting for me in the future. But as I glanced at the number, I felt the air leave my lungs. 10 cents. I thought there had to be some mistake, some glitch in the system. So, I called HR. A woman on the other end confirmed the number with a cold, robotic tone. Yes, Ethan, your pension balance is 10 cents. You have a few options, but we recommend starting with the basics. My heart pounded in my chest. How could this be happening? 10 cents? That was a joke. Right? I spent the next few days digging into it. There were discrepancies in the records, paperwork I had never seen, accounts that didn't add up. But what hit me the hardest was the realization that the company had been mismanaging their pension funds for years. All those years I'd given, working overtime, skipping vacations, sacrificing my own time and energy for the good of the company, and this was the reward. I was blindsided. I confronted my boss, Mr. Richards, who had always been a stern figure but one I respected. He was the kind of guy who prided himself on running a tight ship, and his word carried weight in the office. I thought he would be the one to help me sort things out, to fix what was wrong. But when I walked into his office and showed him the pension statement, the look in his eyes was not one of surprise or sympathy. It was indifferent. Ethan, he said with a sigh, leaning back in his chair, this is just how it is. You should have known better than to put all your eggs in that basket. We don't have the resources to fix everyone's pension, and frankly, it's your responsibility to plan ahead. You're better off looking for another job. I was stunned. The words hit like a slap. Leave, he said again, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. There was no apology, no recognition of the years I dedicated to the company. He didn't care. I was nothing more than a cog in the machine. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. I had been loyal, compliant, and patient. And in return, I had been cast aside like yesterday's trash. I'd been given 10 cents after giving everything, and now I had nothing left to lose. I walked out of Mr. Richards' office, the door closing behind me with a quiet thud. But the sound felt louder than a crash, echoing in the hollow space of my mind. 10 cents. After 10 years of sweat, late nights, and working holidays, 10 cents. My hands shook as I stared at the pension statement in my grip. The same numbers I had seen over and over again, but now they felt like a cruel joke, mocking everything I thought I understood about loyalty, sacrifice, and hard work. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. For a brief moment, I considered doing what most people would, just walk away. Find another job, start fresh, and leave this painful memory behind. But that thought lasted all of 2 seconds. I couldn't just let this go. This was more than a simple case of being undervalued. This was about integrity, justice, and what was right. I went home that night, but sleep didn't come easy. I tossed and turned, my mind running in circles, replaying the conversation with Mr. Richards over and over again. You're better off looking for another job. It was as though he had written me off with a single sentence, as if my entire existence within that company amounted to nothing. I thought about all the time I'd sacrificed, how I had put my personal life on hold, ignored my family's calls, and missed out on relationships because I believed in the company. But now, I realized, they hadn't believed in me. They had taken me for granted. They had taken all of us for granted. I was furious. Furious at Mr. Richards, furious at the company, and most of all, furious at myself for ever trusting them in the first place. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been a fool for believing their promises, for thinking my hard work would amount to something tangible. Instead, I had been manipulated into thinking I was part of something bigger. But it was all a lie. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the 10-cent balance on my pension statement. It felt like an anchor around my neck, dragging me down. I knew I couldn't just let it go. I needed answers. I needed action. I decided to meet with HR again, but this time, it wasn't to ask for clarity. This time, I was prepared. I had been working in IT for the company for years, and I knew the ins and outs of the systems better than anyone else. I knew how the management software worked, how the data was stored, and how to access it all. I wasn't just going to sit there and beg for answers, I was going to take matters into my own hands. I spent the entire day at the office, pretending to do my normal duties while subtly gathering information. I'd accessed files on pensions before, but never at this scale. As I dug deeper into the systems, I found discrepancies that went far beyond my own account. Other employees had been affected by the same errors, their pensions mysteriously disappearing or showing insignificant balances. The more I uncovered, the more it became clear the company was not just mismanaging funds, they were actively covering up a series of financial mistakes. The pension system was a facade, a false promise meant to keep employees complacent, all while the company funneled money into other projects or their own pockets. The thought made my stomach churn. I could feel my blood pressure rise as I scrolled through page after page of financial records. It was all there, right in front of me, the truth I had been too blind to see for years. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was systematic. Employees weren't just being mistreated, they were being robbed. I knew I had to act. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became, if I didn't do something, no one else would. I wasn't going to let this company keep ruining lives, including mine. I needed to make them pay for what they had done to all of us. But I also knew that exposing the company's corruption wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't just fighting for a pension anymore, I was fighting a massive corporation with deep pockets and a lot of power. If I went public with what I knew, they would have no problem destroying me. They had the resources to discredit me, to bury the truth, to make me look like a disgruntled employee with a vendetta. They'd have the media on their side, they'd have the legal teams, and they'd have the upper hand in every possible way. And yet, I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't let this slide. The more I thought about it, the more desperate the situation seemed. The company would I'd back, and they would do so viciously. But I couldn't ignore the faces of my co-workers, the ones who had trusted the company, just like me. I couldn't let them suffer. Without a fight, I started to hatch a plan. A risky, dangerous plan. If they thought I was done, if they thought I would just accept their lies and their broken promises, they were dead wrong. I wasn't going to leave quietly. I was going to make them pay. But the stakes were higher than I ever could have imagined. I was going up against a corporation that had the power to ruin my life. If I failed, I would lose everything, my job, my reputation, maybe even my freedom. But if I succeeded, I could bring the whole house of cards crashing down. It was time to make a choice, stand up and risk it all, or walk away with my tail between my legs. The decision was made. The war was on. The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but the adrenaline in my veins made it hard to think straight. Each moment brought me closer to a point of no return. I had access to the company's financial systems, and the more I dug, the more I realized how deep the corruption ran. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about everyone who had been mistreated, misled, and robbed by a company that treated us all like expendable assets. I knew I needed help. But who could I trust? Every person I thought of felt like a potential liability. The management team was loyal to Mr. Richards, and my co-workers had no idea what was really going on behind the scenes. But then there was Sarah. She was in HR, and though I hadn't spoken to her much before, she was always a quiet presence in the office, competent, reliable, and seemed like she genuinely cared about the employees. I wasn't sure if she'd want to get involved, but I was running out of options. I decided to take the risk. I caught her in the break room one afternoon, pretending to sip my coffee while I waited for her to finish her phone call. When she hung up, I casually approached her. "Hey, Sarah. Got a minute?" She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised but not suspicious. "Sure, Ethan. What's up?" "I need to talk to you about something important," I said, my voice low. "Something about the company's pension program." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see the skepticism in her expression. "What about it?" I hesitated for a moment, weighing the consequences. If I was wrong, if she wasn't on my side, I could be making a huge mistake. But I had to take the chance. "I've been looking into it," I said quietly, "and there's something not right. The pension funds are being mishandled. There are errors, discrepancies. It's not just my account. It's a pattern. I think the company's been covering it up." Her face remained unreadable for a moment, and I could almost hear her thinking it through. Finally, she spoke. "You sure about this?" I nodded. "I've seen the records. I'm not just guessing. This isn't a mistake, it's intentional." There was a long pause as she glanced around the break room, almost as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. "If this is true," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you're not the first person to notice. But we have to be careful. The company has eyes everywhere." I didn't want to admit it, but I had already known that. "So, what do we do?" She shook her head slowly, her expression tense. "I don't know. But if this is as big as you say, we can't just sit on it. You have to be prepared for the fallout. This isn't just about a pension anymore. This is about exposing something much bigger. And if you're going after the company, you'll have to be ready for everything to change." That was the point of no return. Sarah was on board. But with that came a new weight on Miss Holders. We weren't just fighting for justice anymore. We were up against an empire, an organization that controlled everything from our paychecks to our reputations. The stakes had gone from personal betrayal to an all-out war. Sarah and I set up a plan. We would start gathering evidence, more records, more documents, more proof. But we had to be subtle. The last thing we needed was to attract attention too soon. I continued to dig into the systems, keeping my actions as quiet as possible while Sarah worked in the background, pulling more financial reports, more internal communications. It wasn't easy. Every click of the mouse felt like a step closer to being caught, and every hour that passed made my nerves spike higher. One afternoon, just as I was compiling another batch of damning evidence, the unthinkable happened. My computer screen went black. I stared at it for a moment, frozen, before frantically tapping the keys, trying to wake it up. But nothing happened. I turned the power off and on again, but it was clear the system had crashed. Panic bubbled up in my chest. What was going on? I wasn't the only one in the office with access to sensitive information. Could someone have found out? I glanced around the room, half expecting someone to be watching me, but everything seemed normal. My heart pounded in my ears as I rebooted the system. After what felt like an eternity, the screen lit up again, only to show a warning message. Unauthorized access detected. I cursed under my breath. Someone had discovered what I was doing. My heart raced as I immediately unplugged the computer and left the office, my mind racing with possible scenarios. Had I been caught? Was this the end? I knew I had to act quickly. I couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. It was only a matter of time before they came for me. I needed to cover my tracks, and fast. But the pressure was mounting. The walls were closing in, and I could feel the weight of every decision crushing me. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. I had Sarah to think about now, too. She had risked everything by helping me, and I couldn't let her get caught in the crossfire. By the end of that week, the tension was unbearable. My phone rang late one night. It was Sarah. Her voice was tense, almost frantic. "Ethan, they know. They are coming for you." I didn't need to ask who they were. The company had found out about our investigation. And now, they were making their move. The moment Sarah's voice crackled through the phone, I felt my entire body freeze. They? No. It was as if the world had tilted off its axis, and I was left scrambling to find my footing. Every risk I had taken, every step I had made to expose the company's corruption, had led me to this moment. The walls were closing in. The shadows of the past few weeks of late nights, stolen files, whispered conversations, were now taking shape, and they were coming for me. I could hear Sarah's rapid breaths on the other end. "Ethan, you need to get out of there. Now. They are monitoring everything." I overheard a conversation. "They're going to terminate you and me if we don't stop this." I didn't know how much time I had. I felt like I was in a slow-motion dream, watching everything fall apart around me, unable to stop it. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. My heart hammered in my chest. Was I ready to lose everything? My career? My reputation? My freedom? I grabbed my jacket, threw it on, and left my apartment in a daze. I had to act fast. But I wasn't running away, I was running towards something bigger. There was no turning back. The company had already seen me as a threat, and I knew they would stop at nothing to silence me. But if I backed down now, all the sacrifices I had made, all the evidence I had uncovered, would be for nothing. I arrived at the office building, my hands sweaty on the steering wheel. I had been here 1,000 times, but tonight, it felt like a fortress, one that had turned against me. I parked my car in the lot, the lights of the building casting long shadows across the pavement. There was no going in the front door now. I knew the security cameras would be watching. And if I wanted to survive this, I needed to think smarter. I pulled out my phone and texted Sarah. "Meet me at the back entrance. We're doing this tonight." I didn't expect an answer, but seconds later, her message came through, "I'm already there. Be quick." I slipped out of the car and walked toward the rear of the building, where the small door marked "Employees Only" barely stood out in the dim light. I glanced around, every sound amplified in the silence of the night. I could feel the tension in the air, as if the whole city was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. When I reached the door, Sarah was waiting for me, her face tense, eyes darting nervously. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Once we go in, there's no turning back. The moment we start, it'll be over for both of us if we don't get this right. I nodded, my heart beating harder now. It's the only way. We have to expose them, every single one of them. She didn't hesitate. Together, we made our way down the narrow hallway, towards the heart of the building where all the management systems were housed. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, fear, and determination fighting for dominance. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, maybe even Mr. Richards, was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. But I couldn't afford to let that fear consume me. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. Where the server room, where the digital heart of the company beat. I'd been in here countless times, fixing bugs and running diagnostics, but tonight, I wasn't here to fix anything. I was here to destroy the very systems that had allowed the company to keep their lies hidden. I sat down at the desk, my fingers flying over the keyboard. Sarah stood watch, her eyes scanning the hallway nervously. The tension in the room was suffocating. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to focus. The firewall was tougher than I'd anticipated, but I knew the systems well enough to bypass it. I had spent years learning the ins and outs of the company's infrastructure. If I could do this without getting caught, the truth would be undeniable. But just as I was about to access the final file, the door to the server room opened with a soft click. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, my hand hovering above the keyboard. Sarah gasped, and I turned to see a shadowy figure in the doorway. It was Mark, the head of security. He was a big guy, tall and intimidating, and I'd never seen him outside his uniform. He had always been loyal to the company, never once questioning the status quo. "Ethan," he said, his voice low and grim. "You've made a huge mistake." In that moment, everything went quiet. I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. And for a fleeting second, I thought about surrendering. Maybe this was it, the end of the line. But then I remembered what I was fighting for. The injustice. The lies. The betrayal. I couldn't give up now. I straightened up in my chair, my fingers finding their resolve. "I haven't made a mistake, Mark. You have." Without another word, I hit a series of keys, triggering a series of actions that would delete all the company's management systems. Every financial record, every corrupted file, every piece of evidence that had been used to hide the truth, gone. Just like that. The room lit up with alarms as the system began its countdown. Mark's eyes widened in horror. He lunged at me, but it was too late. The data was already being erased. "You can't do this," Mark shouted, his voice cracking. "You'll destroy everything." I turned to Sarah, who was watching in stunned silence. She looked at me, her eyes full of fear, but also a flicker of something else, something that reminded me why I had started this fight in the first place. "I'm not destroying everything," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through me. "I'm taking back what was stolen. It's not too late to do the right thing. You can join us, Mark. You can help expose them. But if you don't, we're done. The company won't stop until we're both out of the picture." For a moment, Mark hesitated. His eyes flickered between the screen, the alarms blaring, and me. But in the end, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. I watched the countdown reach 0, and with it, everything I had uncovered was erased. The company's lies were now exposed, but the fight wasn't over yet. We had made our stand, but there would be consequences. The real battle, our battle for justice, was just beginning. The silence in the server room was deafening after the alarms ceased. My heart pounded in My chest, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins, but something inside me had shifted. I had done it. We had done it. But as the seconds passed and the weight of the situation sank in, the reality of what we'd just unleashed began to settle over me like a heavy fog. Sarah stood beside me, her face pale but resolute. The look in her eyes had changed. There was no going back for either of us now. We had done something that couldn't be undone. The company's entire infrastructure, the systems, the financial records, everything was gone. Erased. And with it, any chance the higher-ups had of hiding their wrongdoings. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. We did it, I said quietly. But even as I spoke the words, I knew the battle wasn't over. Far from it. It didn't take long for the consequences to begin. By the time Sarah and I left the server room, the building was buzzing with activity. Phones were ringing. People were scrambling. The higher-ups were already scrambling to contain the damage. We were long gone by then. But I knew it wouldn't be long before they realized what had happened and started looking for us. Sarah and I took the back exit, our footsteps echoing in the still night air. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We had made our choice, and now we would face the consequences. I could feel the weight of every decision on my shoulders, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had been unburdened. The moment we reached my car, Sarah turned to me. We'll have to lay low for a while. They'll come after us. I don't know how long we'll be safe. I nodded, my eyes scanning the surroundings, every shadow feeling like a potential threat. We knew it was coming. We just have to make sure we're ready. Sarah hesitated before speaking again. Do you ever wonder if we did the right thing? I mean, we've changed everything. We've turned their world upside down. But what now? What happens to us? I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since this whole thing had started. She wasn't just some office worker trying to get by. She was someone who, like me, had risked everything to make things right. There was something powerful in that. Something worth protecting. We did what needed to be done, I said firmly. I'm not sure what happens next. But I do know that we've given people a chance to fight back, to reclaim what's rightfully theirs. Maybe that's enough. She nodded, her expression softening. I just hope it doesn't cost us too much. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty. We went into hiding, doing everything we could to stay off the radar. News about the company's collapse started to spread, and it was clear that the consequences were far-reaching. The financial world was shaken. Investors were scrambling to figure out what had happened. The company's stock plummeted, and soon the media was full of stories about the pension scandal. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of satisfaction in the air. People were beginning to talk, to demand answers. And the higher-ups, people like Mr. Richards, were scrambling to cover their tracks. But it was too late. The truth had been exposed, and nothing could change that. Then, the calls started coming in. Some were from people I had never expected to hear from. Old colleagues, former employees, people who had been silenced for far too long. They thanked me, they thanked Sarah. Some even said they were ready to join the fight. Ready to help take down the rest of the corrupt system. It was strange. I had gone into this thinking I was fighting for myself, for justice. But what I didn't expect was the ripple effect that followed. It was like a storm, slowly gathering. Momentum as more and more people stood up for what was right. But even as we received praise and support, the reality of what we had done hung over us. We were still hiding, still unsure of what the future would hold. The risk of retaliation loomed large, and there were days when it felt like the world was on the edge of collapse. But Despite it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about something bigger, something more personal. I had taken control of my life. I had fought back. And I had won. Weeks passed before we were contacted by a journalist who had been investigating the company's activities. He had the resources and the platform to bring our story to the public, to show the world the full extent of the corruption that had been hidden for years. Together, we arranged an interview, and the story broke in the headlines. The company was publicly exposed for its fraudulent practices. Legal action was taken, and investigations were launched. People who had been wronged began to seek justice, and the company was held accountable in ways I never thought possible. Mr. Richards, along with other top executives, was eventually arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The company underwent a complete overhaul, with new leadership brought in to restore trust and rebuild what had been destroyed. But it wasn't the same company anymore. It couldn't be. As for Sarah and me, we stayed in hiding for a while longer. The media attention eventually died down, and the legal proceedings took months to unfold. But in the end, we were free. We had to do the right thing, no matter the cost. Looking back, I realized that it wasn't just about bringing down the corrupt system, it was about reclaiming my own life. I had spent so much time feeling helpless, feeling small, but now I knew that I had the power to change things. I had the power to fight back, and I had the courage to face whatever came next. The lessons I learned weren't easy ones, but they were necessary. I had learned that justice isn't always served on a silver platter. Sometimes you have to take it, even if it means risking everything. And in the end, that was the only way to truly reclaim your life.